After detectives Peter Simmons and Richard Weeble grilled the car thief after his last haul, Kreska had something else on his mind. If I had some information about a murder, he said, and I showed you where the body is buried, would you guys make a deal on the car? Detectives were reluctant, but they listened to Kreska as he described a grave in a storage garage somewhere in the town of Waukesha Farm, a garage that belonged to an uncle of John Bushman. A snow drifted across the highway. They drove to Waukesha, with Kreska directing the detectives to the end of the road of a small farm owned by the Letko family. Sitting in the squad car, he took a piece of paper and sketched the floor plan of the sheet metal storage garage that stood adjacent to the barn. If you dig right here, he said, marking a spot on the drawing, you'll find the body. 3 days later, on the morning of December 8th, with the consent of the family's owner, a team of police returned to the farm. They hauled out a few junk cars, old tires, engine blocks from the garage. They set up a portable heater to cut the icy cold and fired up a leased backhoe. Checking Kreska's diagram, they began to scrape away at the layer of the pea gravel in the corner of the garage. They dug for hours, pulling out boulders, shoveling out buckets and buckets of dirt, until suddenly a shovel uncovered a ghoulish form of a human skull. Willie Kreska was a career criminal known by law enforcement throughout the area as a disreputable source. But this time, he was telling the truth. A body had been buried in the garage. All day and into the night, investigators dug, working on their hands and knees, scraping at the ground with towels and paintbrushes, sifting through the dirt, anything that might be evidence. Got teeth, announced the detective. Minutes later, this is the right arm. And the form of a human began to appear. An arm flung above his head, the legs unnaturally bent sideways, sprinkled over the form was a white powder, determined by police to be lime. More than a dozen investigators from Waukesha, Milwaukee converged on the site. Police and prosecutors, medical examiners, all of them well versed on the history of the outlaws' unsolved cases. The sheet metal garage, once used by John Bushman to store old cars, was transformed into an archaeological dig. Just before midnight, investigators had unearthed the full human skeleton. Weeks later, in several interviews with Detective Hunter and Willie Kreska went further with his story. In one discussion held at Waukesha County Jail, Kreska got to talking about his death, his friend, Droback. Suddenly, he burst into tears. In the summer of 1978, Kreska and Droback were operating a chop shop together on 35th and Valete in Milwaukee. One day, Droback told Kreska to meet him at the Letko farm in Waukesha. Police speculated that Bushman and Droback had lured Clifford Machan to Waukesha farm by telling Machan that he bought him a Harley. It would sponsor him in the Outlaws as a new member. They also instructed Kreska to meet him at the farm. When he arrived, gave him the keys to Machan's new Chevy pickup. Kreska's orders were to take it to the shop in Milwaukee and cut it up. Kreska drove the pickup to his shop and returned to the farm in another vehicle. Droback met us outside the storage garage. The shit already hit the fan, he said Kreska. Inside, Cliff Machan lay on the ground, shot in the stomach with a 12-gauge shotgun, his face crushed in by the butt of a gun. Besides the body, a grave had been dug. Kreska threw up. Droback and Bushman laughed at him, and they stripped the body, rolled it into the grave, and dusted it with lime to speed up the decomposition. An autopsy by the Waukesha County Medical Examiner found the skeletal range to be that of an adult male, 5 to 6 foot, 5'9" inches tall, roughly the same height as Machan. The autopsy also showed that the jaw and nose had been broken, and 3 ribs had been cracked before death. A forensic dentist suggested they examined the teeth and skull, but dental records and medical x-rays of Machan could not be located for comparison. The State Crime Laboratory did a comparison of the photographs taken of the skull and Machan's head, known as the in-camera superimposition, but the photos did not match. Shortly after the remains were unearthed, police interviewed John Bushman in Detroit jail. He had been arrested for bringing in a large amount of cash from Canada through Port Huron, Michigan. Apparently, as part of a money laundering scheme, on his finger he wore a huge diamond ring, specifically resembling the one that Clifford Machan wore, but the ring was not confiscated as evidence. And by the time Milwaukee detectives heard about the feds, it had been released by the jail to an unknown party at Bushman's request. His remains were discovered in the jurisdiction of Waukesha County, but Waukesha County refused to open a homicide case.